Hello, this is Catherine Sheeran, host of the podcast Horse Tales with Cat. I wanted to share with you, as my listeners, the background behind this latest episode. It was meant to be Lunch with George and was a pipe dream initially suggested by my dear friend Dale Vance. When Mr. Morris finally agreed to meet with me, Dale drove me down from Ocala to West Palm Beach to do the interview. Unfortunately, the background noise from the restaurant drowned out our conversation. After several failed attempts to edit the podcast, I had to contact Mr. Morris to let him know that I could not salvage the recording. Mr. Morris graciously agreed to host me at his house to redo the episode. My other friend, Thomas Patty, stepped in and drove me from Ocala to West Palm Beach for my second visit. The conversation has been split into two parts. I hope you enjoy it as much as I enjoyed doing it. A big shout out to Dale and Tom for being so invested in my success. I'm Catherine Sheeran, host of the podcast Horse Tales with Cat. My guest today is a legend in the world of show jumping, and I'm honored to meet with him. George Morris won the Maclay and HSA Hunter Seat Equitation Finals at the age of 14 and remains the youngest rider to have ever done so. He went on to win a silver medal as part of the United States Equestrian show jumping team at the 1960 Olympics in Rome. After leaving riding to pursue the theater, he returned to the sport as a professional to ride and train in 1962. George Morris is arguably the best teacher the sport has ever known. Not only did he train riders such as Conrad Homefield, Leslie Burr Howards, Ann Krasinski, Katie Monahan-Prudhomme, and Norman Delajoyo, to name a few, he was also the chef de keep for the United States Equestrian Team from 2005 to 2013, and for the Brazilian Equestrian Team at the Rio Olympics in 2016. His book, Hunter Seat Equitation, is considered by many to be the Bible as far as the fundamentals for riding are concerned. Mr. Morris, welcome to the show.
Well, Catherine, nice to see you. This is our second visit. You're a very sweet lady. I have a great affinity and history for Canada, its people, its horsemen. So it's a pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here. Let's get right to your story. You just tell me what you'd like us to know about what happened to you back in 2018.
Well, it was a total blindside. I'd been in some way connected to the Olympic Games since 1956 in Tryon, where they had the Olympic trials. I ended up second to Bill Steinkraus, but they did not take me, which was a wise choice of the USET because I was only just 18 and I'd never been abroad, I had no experience. So it would have been a kamikaze event for me to ride in Stockholm, so it was a blessing in disguise. So since then, either as a spectator, rider, coach, chef de keep, whatever, I've probably been to 15 Olympic Games. I did not go to Tokyo in '64 or the alternate Olympics in Rotterdam, where one of my students, Melanie Smith-Taylor, was bronze medalist. I did not go to those two, but all the others I attended in some capacity. So it was very strange, and I've also helped the Swiss in international competition, the Belgians, the Swedes, and in all those years, I never had a background check. I thought you always had background checks. So I was blindsided. It was May 2nd of 2018. I was here in Florida, I think. I was going to Calgary to help some people, but that was a few weeks later, when my lawyer, Bill Berman, called me and said that I was being investigated by Safe Sport. I don't think I even knew what Safe Sport was at that time. Perhaps I'd heard of it, but I don't think so. So, of course, this went out on the internet And I remember going to Calgary because it was all over with the horse people. So this virtually destroyed my life, May 2nd, 2018. This was a year and 3 months before I was officially banned in August of 2019, and a year and a half before this arbitration, this kangaroo court in the New York Times building, a year and a half before any hearing. Well, I never had a hearing. This was called an arbitration. So my life was virtually destroyed a year and a half before anybody heard anything.
Wow.
So that's mind-blowing, because I grew up an American. Luckily, I was from a family that traveled a great deal. I had great exposure early on. I've been to Russia 3 or 4 times. I had a friend from Romania for a long time, so I've been to all those countries, Venezuela, China. I'm not politically an expert, but I'm not stupid. And I saw the heartache of those countries and my friends in those countries and the totalitarian lifestyle in those countries. And I was an American. I was from New Canaan, Connecticut, the WASP enclave of New York City. I had never thought of any of this. So that was the beginning of this new chapter of my life.
Well, I wanted to take you back to Safe Sport because I think we had this conversation last time that I think when Safe Sport came out, when I did the first exam, I was rather shocked by the exam, and I in fact failed a couple of times before I passed it because one of the basic premises of it is that you assume guilt without any kind of proof, and that if there's just the sniff of some sort of issue, you're supposed to report someone, and that just seemed fundamentally wrong to me on so many levels. So I'm thinking, in your case, yes, you were blindsided, but how did you even react in that moment? Because it did turn your world upside down.
Well, because I wasn't banned at that time, and I still was doing many clinics, many clinics, and I was helping a few people at the shows. I helped a few people in Calgary that summer, went to Europe probably. So I carried on thinking, then we never heard anything more. We're talking a year and 3 months till I was banned. We heard nothing. So thinking this ridiculous situation was all going to disappear because there was no notification. My bookkeeper got a call from Safe Sport, and she actually became hysterical and called my lawyer, and he called me. I, to this day, have never had a call in 8 years from Safe Sport or the USEF, the Federation. Not one person.
Wow.
Not one person in 8 years. People that I worked with and did the best in my ability to help riders in this country in the USET. They were all friends, never heard from them. Now, I see friends all the time. I have friends all over the world. I have telephone. But the Federation people, USEF, USET, not one word.
Wow.
That's
shocking.
appreciation. That's real appreciation. I'm being facetious.
Yes.
So I carried on thinking, this is not possible. This is not possible. I had 2 clinics in Montana the first week of August. I came back, flew to, there was Fort Lauderdale, and I was to spend one night in this house. I was then 81. The next day I was going to the Dublin Horseshoe to help a friend at the show, client. And I was to fly to Ludo Philip Arts from Dublin to help his 4 sons for 2 days. Then I was to fly to Stockholm to give a 3-day clinic, then back to Merit at the Marcus Beerbohms to teach her daughter, then back to Helsinki, Finland for a 3-day clinic. That was to be August of 2019. That was before my fall clinic scheduled tour. That was August.
Wow.
So, of course, that was all stopped in its tracks, which probably is a blessing in disguise. But then my life came to a screeching halt, and I chose with my then lawyer, Bill Berman, and then this other safe sport lawyer who's very cozy with safe sport, Howard Jacobs. He got on board. So I chose the arbitration. Now, the arbitration is $5,200 starting out. There was some other fee also. Then, to get my 6 wonderful witnesses, including Matt Cohn, Katie, Cynthia Hankins, Karen Heelan, Matt Cohn was one. He was fantastic. That day in New York City probably cost me $10,000 just for the privilege of this kangaroo court. When the lawyers walked me down to the New York Times building and said, "This is where the arbitration," I said, the New York Times and Safe Sport were working together to accuse me of these things that didn't happen. I said, "How is it possible that the court is in the New York Times building? That's not right. It should be at a neutral place." And Bill said, "Oh, that's just where they have arbitration." So I walked in, having a very divided political family. My grandmother's family owned the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, which was the biggest American daily in the world, and probably the world at that time for a long, long time, the biggest daily in the world. They were very, very prominent Democrats, very powerful Democrats. My father's family, the Morris family, is from the Augusta National, the golf club there. They're Augusta, very big in Augusta, and my father was very Republican. He was head of the Buchanan Republican Town Committee, it was called. So I grew up in the extremes of both. They jibed each other about, "Harry, don't worry, my vote will cancel yours out." And if my father, my mother and grandmother, and they all thought Roosevelt walked on water. My father, if you wanted a red flag in front of my foot, it was to mention the word Roosevelt. So I grew up with that. And there was nothing harsh. There was nothing vicious. Now I picked up this book this week, just came out. It's called Off Course, Detours, DEI and Duplicity at U.S Equestrian Federation. And it's by a very, very conscientious, I don't know her, but I'm reading this book, Judy Berkley. She has done her homework because all that she's written that I know about are true. Because I'm reading the book. They're true. I've been around this sport since the 1940s.
Well, I think one of my questions for you was, what did the Federation have to gain from losing you?
I was the poster boy for safe sport, and I was told that by other friends. I was the catch, not only for this sport. I was also told my case not went just to the FBI and the United States Olympic Committee, but the International Olympic Committee. I was told it even went that far in discussion. So I was the poster boy for not only equestrian, for sport.
And what do you think you would be doing now if that hadn't happened?
Dead. So, I'm a believer in a higher power. I'm not religious particularly, but as I've gone through life, every I had a very emotionally difficult the first 10 years of my life. My parents were heavy drinkers. They're wonderful people. Nervous breakdown. And my grandmother was so intelligent and intuitive. And my sister had a horse, and I always was, I'd look out the window in the car, horses. I always had this thing for a horse. So that was to be my therapy because, these rock stars in New York go to a place called Silver Hill. And Silver Hill is a very famous psychiatric place in Silver Mine, Connecticut, near me. Rehab, not alcoholic rehab, mental rehab.
Uh-huh.
I went there when I was 9.
Oh, gracious.
9 years old.
Wow.
So I started the New Canaan Mounted Troop. My grandmother thought the horses would be therapy, and she was right. Mm-hmm. The New Canaan Mounted Troop is an iconic place in New Canaan, and all my brothers and sisters went there. My father was treasurer, a friend of the Selfs that owned it. But after the first winter, there was too much marching. It was just after the war. And I'm an asthmatic, and that's why my weakest point is horse care, because I can't be in a barn. I wish I could have been in a barn because of asthma. So after the first winter, I said, I'm not going back to the troop because there's not enough riding in this asthmatic condition. So then I went to Ox Ridge, down in Darien, the Ox Ridge Hunt Club. So my family decided this first summer was 1948 that they would lease a horse for me called Robin, a pinto, hot pinto. Just as school was ending, they had a member show at Ox Ridge, and a friend of mine called, and so over the last fence into the sun, the last class of the show, it was just a member show. Robin broke her neck. She had a rotational fall. This was putting me over the cliff. So my grandmother rose to the occasion. Oh, George, tomorrow you can go down to Ox Ridge with Otto Euchrothopter and you can buy a horse. So the tragedy had a silver lining. So throughout my whole life, personally, professionally, tragedies have always had a silver ending. So my job now, not only am I not able to do what I did before, I do a little bit, but not much, because I'm forbidden. They're forbidden. Mm-hmm. But now, for my remaining days, I can stand up with this lady, Judy Berkley, and support what's really happening. Mm-hmm. What's happening in the world, what's happening in this country, and what's happening with the horse business and the Federation.
And what do you think is happening with the horse business? Because it feels like it has turned into something that's all about money.
Because people I don't know much about history. And I have traveled, but I've traveled not like some people. We, the West, has been at war with Marx since 1900. Probably before 1900, I don't know. But I'm sure since 1900. And the Communist Party was started in this country in 1919. And this is the creeping crud. And people are so sweet and naive. My grandmother, she went to Russia repeat, oh, how wonderful Stalin has done for the peasants in Russia. Well, she forgot that he murdered 100 million. They're nice people. Your countries also. They're nice people. They're duped. They're duped by this encroachment. And this encroachment is taking over all. I saw it, I didn't think about it, but I saw it. When I grew up at Aachen, we walked all over the town at night and drank beer and went to beer pubs and everything. You can't now go out in Aachen at night. Falsterbo in Sweden, a town is Malmo. The last time I went to Malmo, the hotel, they said, this street is safe, that you can go out and walk. Well, I taught in Sweden in the early 90s. We went all over Sweden. There was no threat of this. This is all connected. I'm sorry to tell you that, but this is all connected. And this is embedded not only in our horse federation, but all federations, all sport. There is which I just saw last week, I don't know why, nobody told me before. It's called the Centralized Disciplinary Database of Safe Sport. Centralized, that tells me Moscow.
Wow.
That's called Moscow, Russia. Centralized Disciplinary Database. So I never heard of it. This was last week I stumbled on that. 2,400 rows, and each row contains 10 athletes. Across all our sports, 24,000 athletes that have been or are or will be subject to disciplinary action by Safe Sport. That's communism. What is that? I had a friend last week, the working student, and the girl had hurt feelings. She calls Safe Sport. My friend, who's an old professional, the Department of Labor came down on her. She's had to hire lawyers for tens of thousands of dollars. She has reams. This is a wonderful girl who had working students. She was going to close her business. This has nothing to do with horsemanship. The horsemanship I see, God bless the great riders we have, I see between the lines. When I watch on occasion the World Cup, I don't see I know McLean, I know all the players, they're great riders. I see when you stand up to change your diagonal entering the ring, that is bad horsemanship. When a horse stales, they stand up in their stirrups, stop, and look back. That is contrary. When a horse urinates, you stop. Or no, you stop and stand up in the stirrups and wait till the horse pees. When a horse stales, you ride him forward because a horse starts fake staling. You come to an oxer combination and he fake stales, gets behind you. That is a rotational fall accident. I see all of this. I see horses that are not groomed properly. I see horses' manes on the wrong side, too long. I see tack. Look at all the breaking tack in the championships now. Breaking. Because it is what I call crap tack. It is cheap. God knows where it's made. It's not old-fashioned proper Jimmy Weeby or English tack. It's crap tack, and it breaks. And in championships, it breaks. And in these light stirrups, horse show is a tiny tangent of horsemanship. Racing is a tangent to horsemanship. Horsemanship is the base. And all of these tangents, we love them, but they're just tangents to horsemanship. Look at the books I have here. There's veterinary books, there are history books. That's the French shelf, that's the German shelf, that's the American, Italian shelf, that's mixed up biographies, and I have 400 books here. Horsemanship is not winning an Olympic medal, that's part of it. It's much deeper than that. Where's horsemanship going with all of this?
Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because I know you did train with Bert Denemethy and Gordon Wright, am I correct, as well as
Bill Steinkraus taught me this. You have 3 teachers in life. The first teacher gets you going. I had 2 that got me going. V. Felicia Townsend, a wonderful English lady at Oxford who was a wonderful horsewoman. She got me going because I was so frightened. Otto Ukroth, Patty Ukroth's father, a German great horseman. So I had 2 that got me going. stayed close to them forever. I never turned on my teachers. I appreciated my teachers. I loved my teachers. The second teacher, which Bill Steinkraus taught us, was a technical expert. I was lucky to live in driving distance Gordon Wright. Gordon Wright was out of the cavalry in Fort Riley, which was at that time strictly French school with additional of Caprilli coming into the French school because of General Chamberlain. So our Gordon Wright was a product of the French Italian school of Fort Riley. He was a teacher's teacher. Everybody today traces back to Gordon. Laura Kraut, B.Z. Madden, Kent Farrington, through myself, they all trace, in fact, universally, they trace back to Gordon. Gordon did more for the sport directly in generations later. So that was my second technical great teacher. Then Bill Steinkraus, your third, is a world-class master. I had 2 world-class masters.
Wow.
Bert Denemothy and a Dane, Gunnar Anderson. Have you noticed how well the Danes do in dressage? That's because of Gunnar. Gunnar Anderson was, he would walk into Germany, they'd bow. He'd walk from Denmark to Germany, they'd bow. And he was a Stromsholm, which is German, French mix, Swedish equitation. He was the best rider I ever was with. Not jumping. He was a dressage trainer. He trained Liz Hartle, who had polio, and had to be lifted on her horse and was twice silver medal at the Olympic Games behind Henri Saint-Cyr. He was her trainer. So he was, as I say, he'd walk into Germany, the Germans bowed to him. They still, anybody that knows history, very few know history now. But if you mention Gunnar Anderson, he's an icon of icons. Those are my 5 teachers.
Oh, it sounds like they were exceptional.
And the horses were my teachers. My teaching, my pupils taught me more than I taught them, and Buddy Brown said it. And my books have taught me. And I'm a limited horseman. I get up every day and say, I doubt, I don't know. I don't know much in these books, and I've read all of them.
I think that's your humility.
I don't know. I go out to ride a horse or give a lesson. I doubt. But these people we have today, they have no track record. I know them. I know their track records. I know their riding skills. They have no track records. They're running the show, and out of jealousy, they don't want the spotlight on somebody that speaks out and is an advocate for class horsemanship.
Which is crazy on so many levels, because you have given so much to the sport and helped develop the sport so much, and there's so many who have benefit.
They hate me.
And I don't understand why.
They hate me. No, not multitude.
No.
But and I know who they are. Some are ex-students. They want to destroy me, to erase me, to replace me. I know them. They're people I know. They're students. Some are students, ex-students. I think it's people. I think that is nature, mankind, and people. These are people I know.
And it's so interesting, because I think when we last met, I spoke with you and told you I had seen the movie Harry and the Snowman.
Yep.
I thought you, like Harry, have spent your entire life giving to the sport, and it just seems such a shame that at this point in your life, you're not able to finish doing something that you loved.
They don't want me teaching or coaching or going to thank God I'm not. They don't want a spotlight. They want the spotlight.
So when you were teaching, I was going to ask you, and I think I've asked you this before, so I apologize for
That's
asking
all
you
right.
again. but I'm going to ask you, who was your favorite student that you taught?
That's impossible to answer. I loved Jan Marsden Hamilton. I loved all of them. Mm-hmm. I told you this before. There was a girl named Christine Pfister in the 60s. Jen knows her. And we lucked out and bought. I never had maid horses. I never bought my students maid horses. Now they all have to buy maid horses. I found Tina Pfister. I found her a horse that had run over hurdles in Maryland from Betty Bosley's sisters, Sarah Bosley, Secor, named Highclere. And he was a big, rangy, big-boned thoroughbred, about 16'3". She was short, Tina, but she was a terrific rider. So that was the first horse I bought her. Then a year later, I was out at Gussie Bush Grant's farm in St. Louis. I taught clinics out there quite often. And Gordon Wright's assistant's ex-wife from Texas brought up this thin, rather ugly thoroughbred. He had 2 bumps in his head like horns. He did not have a beautiful head. He was very angular, a cat-like type, 16'1", hot, but he was a beautiful jumper. He was named Valhalla because Highclere and Valhalla were 2 streets. She lived in Valhalla, New York, in that area. And they turned out to be 2 iconic, or she was the only one that could beat Rodney. At Devon, Madison Square Garden. She, with those 2 horses, had an incredible run. She packed up after being working on her champion at Madison Square Garden. It was a blizzard, and she and the brother and the father knew nothing about horses. In a 2-horse trailer, took the 2 most valuable horses in America in a blizzard to Toronto to the Royal Winter Fair. And I called her a day or 2 later, said, "Tina, how did you do?" "Oh, George, I did pretty well. Valhalla won the lightweight and Highclere won the middle and heavyweight." She was 16, 17. I have a warm, God bless all the others, because I have favorites in other compartments. But I would say Devon, where she would be champion in both divisions, win the medal in the Maclay. Monday morning, then we started the open show, when the horses were first year or second year or working, whatever. And she would come out with a little warm-up ring at Devon. She said, "George, what do you want me to do?" I said, Tina, you just won every class over the weekend. She was so humble. She was so humble. Now, other favorite pupil, that one, I won't mention her name, but 3 weeks after she won the Maclay at the Garden, she brought a young horse out to my farm in New Jersey. She was from New Jersey. People will figure out who it was. And I put her on a circle to work with this young horse, and she was doing all the talking. And she was 15. So I got back at her in Boca Raton. We came to Florida 3 months later, and I put her on a green horse I had with a very long stride, and I set up a very short gymnastic. He couldn't do it. And she and the horse and the standards and the rails all went ass over tea kettle, and that fixed her. I waited my time, and I got even with her. A great friend. She's a superb rider, competitor. I don't think she still talks to me. That's all right. I still love her.
And I was thinking, other than her, do you have any difficult ones that stick out in your mind? Ones that were challenging?
They would say, "Oh, Katie Monahan, now Katie Boudon, she's so stubborn. How do you deal with her?" I said, "Oh, yes, she's very stubborn." But I said, I had another student. The 20-mule team could not budge him if he didn't want to do something. I said, "Pales by comparison." And he was also one of my favorites, and that was Conrad Humfeld. And I'm a very big advocate of the forward seat. And he was taught a military seat, good horseman in Houston, a much more upright position, and that was his comfort. But I don't like that. I like a forward inclination. So he was 13, he was very strong-minded, still is. Well, I'll bend over on the hunters, but no other classes. And so in the hunters, he'd get forward. He won the World Cup finals twice, was silver medal in the Olympic Games, gold medal by team, silver medal in the World Champions, gold medal by... No, his credentials are impeccable. But he was more stubborn than Katie.
But I like that you got him to compromise.
Well, on a hunter.
On a hunter only. And then I wanted to ask you about a couple of your horses. Do you have a favorite that stands out in your mind?
Well, that's... I have to go back to Harry DeLaire. We're at the North Shore Show. It was 1957. I was showing some jumpers out in Long Island. And Harry, they had an outside course, and Harry had this weedy, thoroughbred, high-headed, ewe-necked, no part of a hunter, but he was showing, he was a 5-year-old, he was showing him we all started the jumpers in those days as hunters. Mm-hmm. They weren't ribbon horses probably, but that's how we started them out. They didn't have 95 centimeter, a meter. They didn't have all these, which are wonderful. We didn't have that. Mm-hmm. So we had to start them out as hunters. So Harry came off the outside course. I said, Harry, this horse did tricks in the air. He was a foot over every jump and was so elastic and cat-like. I love horses that are cats. Mm-hmm. That's how I buy a horse, if it's a cat. Harry said, George, I won't sell him to you. I'll give him to you. I said, what? You'll give me that 5-year-old that I'm drooling over. He said, but I just want to show him in the 2 rub classes at the start of Madison Square Garden 3 months later. They're 4'3". They were, he was not going to go to the knockdown and out. We went to 6'3" or the puissant. I just want to show them in those 2 classes, and you can have them. So we get to the garden. Of course, everybody's at the garden, and they're all watching all Bill Steinkraus, Frank Chapeau, Jimmy Elder, Doug Cudney, all of your people. They're watching these classes. And this horse goes in and does tricks in there. I said, it's done. I'm never going to get this horse because they're all seeing him. Mm-hmm. So after the second day, I sort of slinked down to the outgate, knowing I'd never get the horse, but still hoping if Harry had told me. And Harry comes out, he's still on the horse, jumps off, runs up his stirrups, and says, George, where do I put this horse? I said, what? I said, well, I pointed him to the Oxford stalls. And, by God, I got the horse.
Gracious, I'm surprised you didn't grab the reins and take him yourself.
Well, I think I probably did. Harry led him, and I was right with Harry. And that was 57. And that same year, I met Tab Hunter, who became a great friend. And actually, because of my headstrong nature, I said, I'm very attracted to this guy. I'm gay. This is at Madison Square Garden. I said, I can't sit with him, go to dinner with him, come back the next day with him, spend the whole horse show with him. I came out. I didn't tell anybody, but everybody knew Tab Hunter. There were whispers at that time. In 57, he was the biggest movie star in the world for a couple of years at that time. I said, there's no hypocrisy, which I see today.
How brave of you.
Horrible. Lying. They're all over the horse show. They lie to their wife. They're sleeping with men forever. They have wives and children. They don't tell them. First of all, it's very dangerous. I don't like that.
No.
So right from the get-go, I never said anything, but everybody yesed. And they were quite surprised, actually, because I always had girlfriends.
Because you're an attractive man.
Well, no, they called me bedroom eyes when I was young. That was the problem. So we struck, that same year, struck up. So after the show, it went 2 days after the junior weekend. That was an 8-day show then. So the horse by then probably was out at Oxridge and Darien. So after the show, Tab and I drove out. I lived in New Canaan. And I rode St. John, and he rode some horse at Oxridge. He was a good rider. Tab was a very good rider. And we went cross country for an hour. Then I came back to the polo field. They had an outside course. But by November, it was all cross. It was at maximum height, and some had the sheep hurdle wings in front, so people could not jump the jumps because it was winter. It was closed off. So there was this high, 4'6", so nobody would jump them. So I said, Tab, watch this horse. I never jumped a crossrail on him. But I had such faith in this horse. That horse hit his stride, jumped the brush, jumped this whole outside course. It was stout, fixed fences, 4'3", 4'6", some with wings in front or behind. And this horse did tricks in the air.
That's amazing.
That horse was a thoroughbred. He was under 16 hands. He was about 15'3". In fact, I had to pull my stirrups up very short or my toe could hit a rail. So he was my Olympic horse. And then Bill Steinkraus, after I went into the theater school, Bill Steinkraus had great success with that horse. It was one of his favorite. So that was, if I had to pick one.
That would be the one.
But it's like the people you ask me.
Yes.
I don't want to pick one, but if I had to pick one.
And so is that the one, as I recall, you also won a big event in White City near London, and the Queen presented.
That's right.
And what was that?
That was St. John.
Okay. And that was was it the King?
No, that was a Horse and Hound Cup.
Thank you.
That was early in the week, but it was the 1 week she came with Prince Philip. Every night royalty came, but there was not the King George V. It was they were all Grand Prix. Mm-hmm. They're all considered Grand Prix. The George V was the most prominent, but this Horse and Hound Cup was a Grand Prix. And David Broom, who's a great friend of mine, there were only two on the jump-off, David and myself. And I think he slipped on a turn, and the horse fell.
Oh.
I have a tape. I don't see that, but I think that happened. There were only two. So I sort of won by default.
But a win nonetheless.
So I walk in for the presentation, and she's up in a box with this red carpet. It's high, much higher than that, double.
Okay.
And I get off St. John, and as soon as I got off, I was the most nervous I'd ever been. And my knees literally were shaking and wobbly. I didn't know if I could climb those stairs, but I managed to do it. She was so wonderful, so sweet, so discerning, because I was nodding and bowing, and I was starstruck. Mm-hmm. And she was wonderful. And she was a horsewoman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She was a horsewoman.
So she probably really appreciated your win.
Well, she was a horsewoman.
I can't even imagine what that was like, because she wouldn't have been much older than you, I think, at the time.
I was 57. Mm-hmm. I don't know the age difference, but she was young.
Yes. What a wonderful memory. And so then, do tell me a little bit about, I know you went
But then when I had this, much later in life, I had a horse called Rio. It was very successful. I was 50. He won Spruce Meadows. He won the Des Moines. But I was at Windsor, and the day before the show, we were out hacking in the park. There weren't FBI areas, and the day or two before the show, we hacked out in Windsor Park, and this was an extremely difficult horse. He was a nutcase, but he was a very good horse. But he slipped around a turn, and I fell off, And he ran back to the barn, and which was a long way away. In Windsor, the barn was a long way away. Where we hacked out was a long way away. And down this road comes Prince Philip with his four in hand and gives me a lift back to the barn.
How amazing.
That was such a coincidence.
And full circle moment.
Yep. The team had lunch Munich at the Wright Academy by Riem. Prince Philip's sister married Prince Georg von Hanover, and he ran this establishment. Still there. It's a fabulous Wright Academy by Riem. It had a dubious history of being the SS Bavarian headquarters before the war. But this was well after the war. His sister married Prince Georg von Hanover, ran that. So he visited her, and we had lunch with him. He walked in Europe, we had about 15 or 16 horses on the tour always. He walked down the aisle, looked at every horse. He said to Berkley, I want to see that horse out in the yard. The horse he picked was the Confirmation Hunter champion at the Garden, Pikes Peak. So you don't tell me he didn't have an eye for a horse. That's the only horse he had to stake out.
So I guess he knows his stuff too.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating.
Fascinating.